China's defense budget growth rate for 2019 is decreasing, but not the international attention and speculation. What's sounding the alarm this time? What's behind the decrease? And in our continuing series called Ask China, Foreign Aid, how does it work and how is China's strategy different? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you from Beijing. I'm Liu Xin. China will lower its defense budget growth rate to 7.5% in 2019 from last year's 8.1%, according to a draft budget report submitted to the annual session of the National People's Congress on Tuesday. The rate marks the fourth year in a row the budgeted growth rate is single-digit, following 5 consecutive years of double-digit increases. But some international media are highlighting this year's growth rate, saying China is accelerating the growth of its army with a focus on fighting and winning future wars. Meanwhile, China's GDP growth target for this year has been set between 6 and 6.5%, the lowest in 3 decades. Some are asking, how does that number translate in the growth rate of China's defense budget? Does China have an alternative other than modernizing its military? And why do some international media keep harping on the same string? Joining me for the discussion in the Beijing studio are Zhang Jianping, Director of the Center for Regional Economic Cooperation at the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, and Andy Mark, non-resident fellow with the Center for China and Globalization. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. As I said, this week some international media have highlighted on China's defense budget, saying China has accelerated the pace of growing and modernizing its military despite the decrease in defense budget growth rate, with a focus on fighting and winning future wars. That was according to CNN. And that the spending will pay to expand China's navy and acquire advanced aircraft and other weapons to help Beijing enforce its territorial claims in the South China Sea by the diplomat, just to name a few examples. So, Mr. Zhang, do you think these reports objectively reflect the big picture?
I don't think this is a new saying or, a new viewpoint. In my mind, 3 years ago, when I visited Australia, and one scholar also asked me quite, similar question. He asked me, that your military budget is climbing up rapidly. Meanwhile, you provided your new concept of Belt and Road Initiative. And what do you want to do in Asia-Pacific region? I think that's quite similar. But I just told those foreign friends, that China is, a big country. We have a so big population compared with the United States. Also, China's, economic scale also are bigger and bigger. So in that process, China's military budget also need to be, expanded gradually, because China's, I think that the main purpose is to is for our, defense mission.
Yeah, active defense is China's military strategy, and yet it's interesting. Some people think that China's military budget has been rising rapidly. I do not know where that impression comes from. Andy.
Well, I think any increase in military budget will alarm certain people in the West.
But there are no. What are the bases for such impression? Because if you look at China's budget growth rate, for instance, as I said, for a couple of years it's been single-digit. This year is actually lower than last year, and in the past we've had double-digit growth, and now it's single-digit. Where is the gap between people's perception of China's military budget rise and what has actually happened?
Well, as you said, Singh, the numbers are the numbers, right? So I'm not sure what they might mean if they say that it's increasing at an increasing rate. Perhaps
increasing rapidly.
Oh, increasing rapidly. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, again, I think there are a number of people out there who probably would love to see a 0% or even a decrease. So any increase would be seen as alarming. That being said, 7-8% is not an insignificant number, especially when you compare that against a $13 trillion economy. It's a significant amount of money. But I think we also need to recognize that we can look at it on a population basis, but I think another effective way of understanding this is China's security requirements are also increasing. It's not just the size of the country, but as China has more investment overseas, as more people, Chinese work overseas, and especially as more and more China depends on energy from other parts of the world, food from other parts of the world. Being able to maintain its maritime security is, I think, a very legitimate goal.
I'm not sure China is depending more and more on food from other parts of the world.
I'd just like to add one point. That is actually this type of, growth rate slowdown shows that actually China's government is trying to make more rational budget distribution. Especially China's budget, military budget growth rate should be matching with China's, GDP growth rate and the residents' income growth rate. So, especially in recent years, China's GDP growth rate already, slowed down. So we think that our military budget should be, match that.
Yeah. Well, I have to point it out. Sorry.
Yeah.
Although the increase, the growth rate is slowing down, but because the base number is getting bigger by the year, so the actual amount put into defense is probably steadily increasing. We have to be objective there. If you look at
of course, you know that in recent years, China not is only for domestic military budget, but also you may find that China is playing more and more important role for international, affairs, such as China's, maritime, protection for those business ships.
For business ships from everywhere. But Andy, you wanted to say something.
No, I would disagree, though, because I think that the percentage of defense spending really has no correlation to GDP, because what it's really driven by is the external security environment.
GDP growth?
Yes, yes. Because if you think about it this way, to use an extreme case, for instance, when the U.S. was fighting World War II, defense spending as a percentage of GDP or GDP growth was enormous because it's in response to an external security challenge. So I think one way we can understand this decrease from double-digit to 7–8% is it's also a signal that China maybe views the external environment a bit more benignly. Because if it saw
it makes a lot of sense.
Threat,
it actually makes a lot of sense.
I think this
a lot
more money.
So instead of to substantiate what a lot of people claim as China's ambition to claim territories in the South China Sea, I think China sees the situation calming down, that the security needs is decreasing instead of increasing. However, I want to compare the per capita military spending between China and the United States, and that's according to the Stockholm-based International Peace Research Institute. And let's look at the chart there. According to the 2017 number, China per capita military spending is only $162, whereas the United States is $1,900, almost 11 times. So given that kind of huge gap, Andy, do you think it is justifiable for China to continue to increase its military spending, maybe even greater?
Well, if we look at it from a more simplistic perspective, yes. But I think another way to look at it, too, is that the U.S. has global military objectives. So it's not just, say, the Pacific. It's in the Middle East. It's in Africa, arguably even places like South America. So that's why it spends so much money, any way you measure it, absolute basis per capita. And I think as China also has increasing security requirements globally, I think it makes a lot of sense that it will be increasing
but how
its
much
spending.
of that $1,900 is spent on missions overseas, and how much of it is spent on protecting the U.S. soil? That is still a very big question. Mr. Zhang, what is your take of that chart?
I think that actually, that U.S. is called, police in the world, even if Trump administration today reluctant to play this type of role. But however, in many places, because they hope to protect their overseas interests, also they need to continue to play role. So their military budget also quite huge. Even if today, if you look at China's debt ceiling, had breakthroughs time and time. But for Chinese side, I think that right now, even if budget is climbing up, up, but China's overseas military budget still quite limited, except China's international
I agree
aid.
with this point that you made. I mean, the United States spread its military all over the world. It's not because they want to be a good person. It's not because they want to be humanitarian. Because it sees its international interests that have to be protected, and there are also its obligations with its allies, which does not come as some kind of a gift to these allies. Andy?
No, I think that's very true, Sing. And also, I mean, we have to understand that the United States' conception of national security does not begin in the homeland, but it's forward deployment, because it's better to fight a war, a conflict far from home to prevent any
So
threat
having
to the
said
homeland.
that, the U.S.'s military budget per capita GDP is still very, very much higher than that of China, right?
It is, of course. I mean, we saw that from the chart.
Yeah, let's take a look at another graphic. That's according to Xinhua, China's official news agency. China's budgeted defense spending growth rate stood at 8.1% last year, 7% in 2017, 7.6% in 2016. That is down from 10% in 2015 and other two-digit figures dating back to 2010. There you have the trend. Actually, the percentage of military spending in China's GDP has persistently been declining. So, Mr. Zhang, how do you look at that trend?
I think that right now in China, you know that there is a new kind of doing and policies. That is 军民融合. Actually, we hope that those military projects and those civilian projects, they may have a chance to coordinate, to work together, to promote some of technology in military project could be used in civilian projects, and then those residents can benefit from that process.
Okay.
And I think that that will occupy some of budget. Meanwhile, just before I mentioned that we have to consider our domestic economic situation and our revenues every year, and then we can have a more rational distribution of those budget.
Yeah. Well, just now we were talking about the comparison between China and the U.S.'s per capita military budget, but it's not just compared to the U.S. that the Chinese per capita budget is very small compared to other countries such as Singapore, such as Saudi Arabia is way ahead too. So is there any alternative or perfect rate for the Chinese military spending in the eyes of the the Western media or some journalists in the West?
Well, first, I think we shouldn't kind of paint all of the Western commentators.
I didn't. I say some.
Some, of course, yeah. So I think no, and again, no, right? I mean, because again, there's a kind of a cohort out there that no matter what China does, it will be criticized. And I think they would probably love to see unilateral disarmament from China, right? But I think that being said, another issue I think that, or I'd like to point out, is that this moderation in defense spending, I think, illustrates China also achieving a certain level of material, military equipment. But now the goal, as you were saying, is civil-military fusion to incorporate better technology, better training for the soldiers as well.
All right, we have to leave it there. Time's up. Many thanks to Zhang Jianping and Andy Mark. And coming up, after a short break, another episode of my Ask China series for the Lianghui, or two sessions currently underway in Beijing. Today, I'll be looking at how China handles its foreign aid. Stay with us.